Book Third of the Joyful Wisdom, Part 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Joyful Wisdom by Friedrich Nietzsche, translated by Thomas Common. Book Third, Part 2.
141. Too Oriental? What? A God who loves men, providing that they believe in him, and who hurls frightful glances and threatenings at him who does not believe in his love. What? A conditioned love, as the feeling of an almighty God,
which has not even become master of the sentiment of honour, and of the irritable desire for vengeance.
How oriental is all that? Quote, "If I love thee, what does it concern thee?" Unquote. Translator's footnote. This means that true love does not look for reciprocity, end translator's note, is already sufficient criticism for the whole of Christianity. 142. Frankincense. Buddha says, "Do not flatter thy benefactor." Let one repeat this saying in a Christian church. It immediately purifies the air of all Christianity. 143. The greatest utility of polytheism.
For the individual to set up his own ideal, and derive from it his laws, his pleasures, and his rights.
That has perhaps been hitherto regarded as the most monstrous of all human aberrations, and as idolatry in itself. In fact, the few who have ventured to do this have always needed to apologise to themselves, usually in this wise: quote, not I, but a God through my instrumentality."
Unquote.
It was in this marvellous art and capacity for creating gods, in polytheism, that this impulse was permitted to discharge itself. It was here that it became purified, perfected and ennobled, for it was originally a commonplace and unimportant impulse, akin to stubbornness, disobedience and envy. To be hostile to this impulse towards the individual ideal, that was formerly the law of every morality. There was then only one norm, quote, "the man," unquote, and every people believed that it had this one and ultimate norm. But above himself, and outside of himself, in a distant overworld, a person could see a multitude of norms.
The one God was not the denial or blasphemy of the other gods.
It was here that individuals were first permitted. It was here that the rights of individuals was first respected. The inventing of gods, heroes, and supermen of all kinds, as well as coordinating men and undermen,
dwarfs, fairies, centaurs, satyrs, demons, devils,
was the inestimable preliminary to the justification of the selfishness and sovereignty of the individual, the freedom which was granted to one God in respect to other gods, was at last given to the individual himself in respect to laws, customs, and neighbours. Monotheism, on the contrary, the rigid consequence of the doctrine of the one normal human being, consequently the belief in a normal God, beside whom there are only false, spurious gods, has perhaps been the greatest danger of mankind in the past. Man was then threatened by that premature state of inertia, which, so far as we can see, most of the other species of animals reached long ago, as creatures who all believed in one normal animal and ideal of their species, and definitely translated their morality of custom into flesh and blood. In polytheism, man's free thinking and many-sided thinking had a prototype set up, the power to create for himself new and individual eyes, always newer and more individualized, so that it is for man alone, of all the animals that there are no eternal horizons and perspectives. 144. Religious Wars. The greatest advance of the masses hitherto has been religious war,
for it proves that the masses have begun to deal reverently with conceptions of things.
Religious wars only result when human reason generally has been refined by the subtlest disputes of sects, so that even the populace becomes punctilious, and regards trifles as important, actually thinking it possible that the "eternal salvation of the soul" may depend upon minute distinctions of concept.
145.
Danger of vegetarians. The immense prevalence of rice eating impels to the use of opium and narcotics, in like manner as the immense prevalence of potato eating impels to the use of brandy. It also impels, however, in its more subtle after effects to modes of thinking and feeling which operate narcotically. This is in accord with the fact that those who promote narcotic modes of thought and feeling, like those Indian teachers, praise a purely vegetable diet, and would like to make it a law for the masses. They want thereby to call forth and augment the need which they are in a position to satisfy. 146. German hopes. Do not let us forget that the names of peoples are generally names of reproach. The Tartars, for example, according to their name, are "the dogs."
They were so christened by the Chinese.
Deutschen, Germans, means originally "heathen." It was thus that the Goths after their conversion named the great masses of their unbaptized fellow tribes, according to the indication in their translation of the Septuagint, in which the heathen are designated by the word which in Greek signifies "the nations," see Ulfilas, It might still be possible for the Germans to make an honourable name ultimately out of their old name of reproach, by becoming the first non-Christian nation of Europe, for which purpose Schopenhauer, to their honour, regarded them as highly qualified. The work of Luther would thus be consummated, he who taught them to be anti-Roman, and to say, "Here I stand, I cannot do otherwise." 147. Question and Answer. What do savage tribes at present accept first of all from Europeans? Brandy and Christianity, the European narcotics. And by what means are they fastest ruined?
By the European narcotics.
148. Where reformations originate. At the time of the greatest corruption of the Church it was least of all corrupted in Germany. It was on that account that the Reformation originated here. As a sign even the beginnings of corruption were felt to be unendurable. For, comparatively speaking, no people was ever more Christian than the Germans at the time of Luther. Their Christian culture was just about to burst into bloom with a hundredfold splendour. One night only was still lacking, but that night brought the storm which put an end to all. 149. The failure of reformations. It testifies to the higher culture of the Greeks, even in rather early ages, that attempts to establish new Grecian religions frequently failed. It testifies that quite early there must have been a multitude of dissimilar individuals in Greece, whose dissimilar troubles were not cured by a single recipe of faith and hope. Pythagoras and Plato, perhaps also Empedocles, and already much earlier